It was one of those afternoons that felt slow and peaceful. The sun was still high, the streets were quiet, and the only sound was the soft tapping of basketballs echoing from the park down the street. A 17-year-old boy named Derek had just finished practice and was walking home with his gym bag slung over one shoulder. Sweat clung to his forehead and his shirt stuck slightly to his back. He didn't mind, though. He loved these walks. They gave him a bit of space to think, to breathe. Before he got home and faced another round of homework, he had his earphones in. Music turned low, just enough to hear the rhythm but not so much that he missed the sounds around him. He cut through a quiet street lined with neat houses, white fences, trimmed hedges, and cars that glistened like they were washed every weekend. It was a nice neighborhood, the kind of place people felt safe in. At least most people did. Derek didn't notice the police car right away. It was parked a little down the road, idling near the curb. Inside sat two officers, one talking into his radio, the other watching the street. Derek was just a kid walking home, minding his business. He'd done this route hundreds of times before. He was thinking about the leftovers his mom might have made, and whether she'd have time to help him with a history project later. His mother worked long hours, and even when she was home, she carried the tiredness of her job in her eyes. But she always made time for him. That thought made him smile a little. He reached the end of the block when a voice broke through his music. "Hey, you there, stop for a second." Derek turned, confused. He saw two officers stepping out of the patrol car. The taller one had his hand resting near his holster. The other adjusted his belt, walking toward Derek with a serious look. Derek pulled out his earphones slowly, not wanting to make any sudden moves. "Yes, sir?" he asked, his voice careful but polite. "Where are you coming from?" the taller officer asked. "Basketball practice," Derek said. He lifted his bag a little, showing them the ball sticking out from the top. "I'm just walking home." The shorter officer squinted. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. 2 streets over. Got any ID?" Derek frowned slightly. I don't carry my school ID when I play. I just came from the gym." The taller one took a step closer. "We got a call about a suspicious person in the area. Someone said a guy in a dark hoodie was looking into cars." Derek blinked. "That wasn't me. I'm just walking home. I didn't touch any cars." The officers exchanged a look. The air seemed to thicken a little. One of them tilted his head like he wasn't convinced. "Mind if we check your bag?" Derek hesitated. His mom always told him to stay calm, to be respectful, but to also know his rights. Still standing there on that quiet street with 2 officers looking at him like he'd done something wrong, he didn't feel like arguing. "It's just my gym stuff," he said softly. "You can look." He set the bag down and opened it. A pair of sneakers, a towel, a crumpled jersey, and a half-empty bottle of water. That was it. The shorter officer looked through it, then closed it up, but didn't step back. "Where'd you say you live again?" 2 streets over. "Near the library." The taller one nodded slowly, still not satisfied. "All right. Hands where I can see them." That made Derek's heart skip. He wasn't sure what was happening anymore. He wasn't running. He wasn't shouting. He was just standing there. "Yes, sir," he said, raising his hands slightly. A few people from nearby houses had come outside now, curious about the commotion. Someone started recording on their phone. Derek felt the weight of every eye on him. He could feel the tremor in his own hands. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. "Then you've got nothing to worry about," the taller officer replied. But his tone wasn't comforting. It was sharp. The other officer asked him again for identification. Derek explained he could call his mom, that she'd confirm everything, but they didn't seem to want to hear that. "You fit the description," the taller one repeated. That phrase hung in the air like a cold wind. Derek didn't know what description he supposedly fit, but it was clear they'd already made up their minds. His phone buzzed in his pocket, his mom calling, probably wondering why he wasn't home yet. He tried to pull it out slowly, but the taller officer barked, "Keep your hands up." Derek froze. "It's just my phone," he said quickly. "My mom's calling me." "Keep your hands where I can see them," the officer said again, his voice rising slightly. His hand was now resting fully on his holster. Derek swallowed hard, feeling his stomach twist with fear. The shorter officer seemed uncertain, glancing at his partner. "He's a kid," he muttered. But the taller one didn't back down. "You live around here?" Another voice called suddenly from a nearby porch. It was an older woman, a neighbor. "That's Ms. Carter's boy. He's always walking this way." The taller officer looked her way but didn't lower his guard. "Ma'am, please stay back." Derek's chest rose and fell quickly now. His breathing grew shallow. He felt trapped. Every second stretched longer, heavier. His phone buzzed again, still in his pocket. He wished his mom would somehow appear right there, like she always did when things got rough. Then, in the distance, the low hum of an engine grew louder. A black SUV turned onto the street, coming their way. The car stopped abruptly when it saw the flashing lights. The driver's door swung open fast. Out stepped a woman in a navy suit, heels clicking against the pavement as she moved quickly toward them. Her expression was unreadable, but there was fire in her eyes. "Derek," she called out. "Mom," he said in relief, lowering his hands a little. The officers exchanged confused glances. The taller one moved slightly in front of her. "Ma'am, you need to stay back. We're handling a situation here." She didn't stop walking. "A situation?" She repeated, her voice calm but edged with disbelief. "That's my son." "Ma'am, please step back," the officer said again, trying to sound in control. But she was already pulling something from her jacket pocket. A badge. The gold glinted in the sunlight as she held it up for them to see. "Special Agent Renee Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said clearly, her voice steady as a blade. "And you're going to tell me exactly why my son is being held at gunpoint for walking home." For a split second, the whole street seemed to freeze. The taller officer's face drained of color. The other officer stepped back immediately, hands up slightly as if to show respect. "Ma'am, we didn't realize. You didn't need to realize who I am," she interrupted firmly. "You should have realized who he is. A kid, my kid, walking home after basketball practice." Derek stood there, still shaking slightly. His mom reached him in a few long strides, putting an arm around his shoulders. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He nodded weakly, but his throat felt tight. He wanted to speak, but words wouldn't come. The officers mumbled something about a mistaken call, about following protocol, but she didn't respond right away. She just looked at them, steady, quiet, full of controlled anger. Then she said, "Badge numbers." "Both of you," they hesitated. "Ma'am, now," they gave them. She took out her phone, typed them down, and took photos of their badges. Then she turned back to Derek, brushing a hand across his back. "Let's go," she said softly. As they walked toward her car, Derek looked back once. The officers were still standing there, unsure what to do. The people on the sidewalk were still recording, whispering to each other. When they got into the SUV, Derek finally spoke. "I didn't do anything, Mom." "I know," she said quietly, starting the engine. "I know you didn't." He looked out the window, his reflection blurry against the glass. "They thought I did." Renee didn't reply right away. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. "They saw what they wanted to see," she said at last. "But they saw the wrong kid today." The drive home was quiet. Derek kept thinking about how fast things had changed, from peaceful to terrifying in seconds. He kept hearing the officer's voice, seeing his hand on the holster. His chest still felt tight. When they got home, Renee parked in the driveway and turned to face him. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said. "You shouldn't have to." Derek nodded but stayed silent. There wasn't much to say. She reached over, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did everything right," she said gently. "You stayed calm. You stayed polite. You made it home. That's what matters." He looked at her, eyes tired. "Would they have stopped if you didn't come?" Renee exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I wasn't going to let them find out." Outside, the last bit of sunlight faded, leaving the street in soft shadows. Inside the car, the world felt still again, but neither of them could shake what had just happened. Renee knew tomorrow would bring questions, maybe reporters, maybe paperwork. But for now, she was just a mother who had almost lost the chance to protect her child. And Derek was just a boy who had learned that sometimes walking home could be the most dangerous part of his day. The next morning started quietly, but the air in the Carter house was different. The sound of the coffee maker filled the kitchen, yet neither Derek nor his mother spoke much. He sat at the table, staring into a bowl of cereal he hadn't touched. His mind kept replaying the night before, the flashing lights, the shouts, the look in the officer's eyes when his hand hovered near his holster. His mother stood by the counter, dressed in her usual navy suit, though she looked more tired than usual. She was on the phone with someone from the bureau, her voice calm but sharp. Derek didn't catch every word, but he heard enough to know she wasn't going to let what happened slide. When she hung up, she sighed deeply and rubbed her temples. "You should eat something," she said softly, turning toward him. "I'm not hungry," he replied without looking up. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "You barely slept. You've got to keep your strength up," he shrugged. "I just keep thinking, what if you hadn't come?" Renee looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I did come," she said. "That's what matters. But what about next time?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "What if something like that happens again and you're not there?" The question hung in the air. She didn't know how to answer it. Even as an FBI agent, even as someone who worked with law enforcement every day, she couldn't deny that her son had been treated differently, and she couldn't promise it wouldn't happen again. "I wish I could say it won't," she said finally, her voice low. "But I can tell you this. I'm going to make sure they're held accountable. That's a start?" He nodded, though it didn't make him feel much better. He picked at his cereal, his spoon clinking lightly against the bowl. "Are you going to work?" he asked. "I have to stop by the field office," she said. "And then I'm going to the precinct." His eyes lifted. "You're going there?" "I have questions they'll have to answer," she said simply. Derek hesitated. "Can I come?" She shook her head. "Not this time, honey. I'll handle it. You go to school, keep your head up. I'll see you after." He didn't argue, but when she left, the house felt emptier than usual. He sat for a few more minutes before finally grabbing his bag. He wasn't sure how the day would go, or how he'd even face people after what had happened. But staying home wouldn't change anything. When he reached school, the whispers started almost immediately. A few of his classmates had seen the video. It had already made its way around social media overnight. Someone had posted the clip of the officers shouting at him, followed by the moment his mom flashed her badge. The caption read, "They messed with the wrong mom." Some kids gave him awkward looks. Others came up to him asking questions. "Dude, that was you?" one of his teammates asked. "That video's everywhere. Your mom's a legend." Derek forced a small smile, but inside he felt uneasy. It wasn't funny. It wasn't something he wanted to be known for. Another student, a quiet girl from his English class, approached him gently. "Hey," she said. "I saw the video. I'm sorry you went through that." He nodded. "Thanks." For most of the day, he just wanted to disappear. Every time someone mentioned the video, his chest tightened. Even the teachers looked at him differently, with a mix of sympathy and discomfort. At lunch, he sat outside under a tree, away from the noise. His best friend Trevor joined him after a few minutes. "You good, man?" Trevor asked, sitting down beside him. Derek didn't answer right away. He watched a group of kids laughing nearby, carefree, like the world hadn't just shifted overnight. "I don't know," he said finally. "I keep thinking about how fast it happened." "I didn't even do anything," Trevor nodded slowly. "Yeah, but you stayed calm. I don't think I could have." "I was scared," Derek admitted. "I thought—" He stopped himself. He didn't want to finish that sentence. Trevor looked down. "You think your mom's going to get them fired?" "I don't know," Derek said. "She said she's going to file something. But I think it's more than just them. It's the way they saw me. Like I was a problem before I even said a word." Trevor didn't respond. He didn't have to. That afternoon, when Derek got home, his mom wasn't there yet. He tried to do his homework, but his focus kept slipping. He finally put his books aside and scrolled through his phone. The video had hundreds of comments now. Some people were angry at the officers. Others defended them. A few said things that made his stomach turn. He locked his phone and set it face down on the table. He didn't want to see any more. When the door finally opened and his mother stepped inside, he could tell it had been a long day. She looked drained, but her expression was steady. "Hey," she said softly. "How was school?" "Fine," he said, though his tone said otherwise. She hung her coat and sat on the couch. "I talked to the precinct," she said after a pause. "And Internal Affairs is opening a review." He nodded slowly. "What's that mean?" "It means they'll investigate what happened. The stop, their conduct, the call that started it all." "Did they say who called them?" She hesitated. "A neighbor. Someone said they saw a person acting suspicious near the street. They didn't give much else." Derek shook his head. "Acting suspicious how? I was just walking." "I know," she said quietly. Sometimes that's all it takes for people to assume the worst. He looked down at his hands. It's not fair. It's not, she agreed. But we're going to make sure your name is cleared, officially. And I'm going to make sure they learn something from this. He looked up at her. You mean training or something? Something like that, she said, giving a small smile. Change doesn't come fast, but it starts with people speaking up. People who won't let things slide. There was a knock at the door then. Renee opened it to find one of the officers from the night before, the shorter one. He looked nervous, holding his cap in his hands. Agent Carter, he said respectfully, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. About last night. We didn't handle it right. Renee stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes steady. You're right. You didn't, he nodded. I know it doesn't fix it, but I wanted to tell you in person. Your son didn't deserve that. Derek was watching from the couch, unsure how to feel. Part of him was angry, part of him relieved to hear the apology. Renee's tone softened slightly. Thank you for saying that. I hope you remember how that felt, to see a kid scared not because of what he did, but because of who he is. The officer nodded again. Yes, ma'am. She didn't invite him in, but she didn't shut the door either. When he left, she closed it quietly and turned to Derek. That was one of them, he asked. Yes, she said. The other one didn't come, he sighed. Figures, Renee sat beside him. You're handling this better than most adults would, you know. I don't feel like I am, he said softly. She smiled faintly. That's because you're still processing it. It's okay to feel angry, or sad, or confused. None of this is easy. He looked at her, then leaned his head against her shoulder. I just don't want to be scared every time I see a police car. Her arm went around him gently. You have every right to feel that way. But I promise you, fear doesn't get to own you. Not after this. You walked through it and you're still standing. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the clock ticking softly in the background. Later that night, Renee's phone buzzed. It was her supervisor checking in about the report. When she hung up, she told Derek that the Bureau might use the incident as a case study for training, to show what can go wrong during a routine stop. That's good, right? He asked. It's a start, she said. It means your story might help change something. He gave a small smile, the first real one of the day. Then maybe it was worth it. She looked at him, her son, tired but brave, and felt a mix of pride and pain. Maybe someday we'll look back and say it was, she said softly. Outside, the night was calm again. The same quiet street that had once felt dangerous now seemed still, almost peaceful. But something had shifted, in both of them. Renee knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow she'd meet with officials, review body cam footage, and face the people who had frightened her son. And Derek, he'd face a world that might still look at him the same way, but he'd do it knowing he wasn't alone. For now, though, mother and son sat together in the warm glow of their living room, the noise of the day fading into a soft hum. For the first time since the incident, Derek felt a small sense of safety return. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for that moment, and that mattered most. The next few days felt strange for Derek. Nothing about life seemed normal anymore. People still went about their routines. Cars passed by, kids played basketball, neighbors watered their lawns. But everything looked a little different to him now. He couldn't walk down the street without thinking about that night, about the flashing lights and the fear in his chest. Even at school, things hadn't gone back to normal. Some students still whispered when he passed by. The video had spread further online, and a few local news stations had started covering it. Derek had seen his mother's photo pop up on one headline that read, FBI agent confronts local police after son's mistaken stop. He didn't like the attention, but he understood why it mattered. At home, his mother was busier than ever. She was constantly on calls, talking to reporters, legal officers, and her bureau supervisors. Derek could tell she was walking a fine line, being professional but still angry as a mother. He respected that about her. She wasn't the kind of person who raised her voice, but when she spoke, people listened. One evening, Derek came downstairs to find her sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out everywhere. Her glasses rested low on her nose as she reviewed a printed report. What's all that? He asked, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. Internal affairs documents, she said. They're reviewing the officer's conduct. I'm preparing my statement for the follow-up meeting. Derek sat across from her. Are they in trouble? They're being questioned, she said. But we'll see what comes of it. Departments move slow when it comes to accountability. He frowned. They should just admit they were wrong. Renee looked up at him with a tired smile. Admitting wrong means changing the system. And systems don't like to change easily. He leaned back in his chair. Then what's the point of all this? The point, she said gently, is to make sure no one else goes through what you did. Even if it's one small step. Derek nodded slowly. Deep down, he admired her persistence. But he still couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever really change. The next morning, Renee had to attend a community hearing about the incident. Several police department officials, local leaders, and reporters were going to be there. Derek stayed home from school that day. His mom thought it would be best. He spent the morning flipping through TV channels until he saw her on the local news. She was standing at a podium speaking to the press. She looked calm, professional, the same way she always did when she was on duty. I'm not just speaking as an FBI agent, she said. I'm speaking as a parent. What happened to my son is not unique. It's the reality many families face every day. But it can't be ignored anymore. Derek watched quietly as she spoke. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion. She talked about bias, about fear, about how every encounter like this leaves scars that don't fade easily. The reporters took notes. Cameras flashed, and for the first time, Derek saw his mother not just as his protector, but as a force for something bigger. Later that afternoon, she came home exhausted but hopeful. She dropped her bag on the couch and sighed. That was a long day. I saw you on TV, he said. You were really good, she smiled faintly. Thanks, kiddo. I just hope they were listening. They have to, Derek said. You made them look bad. Renee chuckled softly. It's not about that. It's about making them think. Maybe next time they'll stop and ask questions before assuming. That evening, the doorbell rang. When Renee opened it, a woman stood there holding a folder and a press badge around her neck. She introduced herself as a reporter from a national outlet who wanted to do a feature on what happened. Renee hesitated. We're trying to keep things quiet right now. I understand, the reporter said gently. But stories like yours can make a difference. People listen when they see what's really at stake. Renee looked at Derek, who stood nearby. It's up to him, she said. Derek shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. I don't really want to be on TV again. The reporter nodded. I completely get that. But even a few words from you could help others understand what it feels like. You'd be surprised how powerful that can be. He thought about it for a moment. Maybe telling his story could help someone. Maybe another kid like him would feel less alone. Okay, he said quietly, but I don't want it to sound like I'm mad. I just want people to know what happened. The interview took place in their living room a few days later. The reporter asked gentle questions, letting him speak at his own pace. Derek told her about the walk home, how scared he felt, how helpless it was to have people assume he was dangerous for no reason. When it aired later that week, the response was overwhelming. People sent messages from across the country, expressing support and sharing similar stories. Some even wrote letters addressed to Renee, thanking her for standing up not just as an agent but as a mother. But not everyone reacted kindly. There were comments online that dismissed their experience, saying things like, he should have just followed orders, or they were doing their job. Derek tried to ignore them, but the words still stung. One night, while he was scrolling through the messages, his mom walked in. She saw the screen and gently took the phone from his hand. Don't read those, she said softly. You'll only hurt yourself. I just don't get it, he said, frustrated. They don't even know me. You don't have to convince everyone, she replied. The ones who understand are the ones who will help make things better. He nodded slowly. You really think this will change anything? She smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. Change starts with uncomfortable conversations. That's exactly what we're doing. In the following days, things began to shift a little. Local police held new community sessions to address profiling and communication during stops. Some officers even reached out privately to Renee, thanking her for speaking up and admitting they'd learned something from her speech. At school, Derek noticed small changes too. Some teachers used his story as an example in social studies discussions about justice and equality. A few classmates even started a student group focused on community awareness. He didn't like the spotlight, but he appreciated the fact that people were starting to talk, really talk, about things that usually went unspoken. One afternoon, as he was walking home again, Derek noticed a police car turning onto the street ahead of him. For a moment, his stomach tightened, old fear flickering inside him. The car slowed, and one of the officers rolled down the window. "Hey, you're Agent Carter's son, right?" the officer said, smiling politely. Derek nodded, unsure what to say. "I just wanted to say your mom's doing good work," the officer said. "We've been having new training sessions because of what happened. You take care, all right?" Derek managed a small smile. "Thanks." As the car drove away, he exhaled, realizing he hadn't even noticed he was holding his breath. Maybe things wouldn't change overnight, but at least they were starting to move in the right direction. When he got home, his mom was already there, sitting on the porch with 2 mugs of tea. "You look thoughtful," she said as he sat beside her. "I saw a cop today," he said. "He actually smiled at me." Renee smiled too. "That's good to hear." "Yeah," Derek said. "I think maybe—" "They're trying," she nodded, taking a slow sip of her tea. "Sometimes that's all we can ask for. Effort." For a while they sat in silence, watching the sun dip behind the houses. The sky was streaked with orange and gold, and for the first time in weeks, Derek felt a sense of calm. "You know," his mom said quietly, "when I joined the bureau, I thought I'd be making a difference out there. Catching criminals, stopping threats. But lately I think the real work is right here, in how people see each other." He looked at her. "You already are making a difference," she smiled, her eyes soft. "So are you, kiddo. You spoke up when it mattered." He looked away shyly, though he felt proud deep down. As night fell, the quiet hum of the neighborhood returned. The same street where everything had once gone wrong now felt a little safer. Derek knew people would keep talking about what happened. Maybe some would move on. Maybe others would learn from it. But he'd stopped letting fear define him. And as for his mother, she wasn't done yet. She had plans to work with local departments, helping to build programs that trained officers on empathy, communication, and awareness. That night before bed, Derek stood by his window and looked out at the quiet street. The memory of that night still lingered, but it no longer controlled him. He was still here. He was still walking forward, and somewhere deep down he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That night the house was quieter than usual. The air felt heavy, almost like it was holding its breath. The boy sat at the edge of his bed, still wearing the same clothes from earlier. His hands trembled slightly as he replayed the scene in his head again and again. The flashing lights, the loud voices, the fear that made his chest tighten. Down the hall, his mother was on the phone. Her voice stayed calm, but there was a sharpness behind every word. She was speaking to someone from the police department, making sure what had happened wouldn't be brushed aside. She was used to handling high-pressure situations at work, but tonight, this felt different. This was her son. When she finally hung up, she stood for a moment, leaning against the wall. For the first time that day, she let herself take a slow, shaky breath. Then she walked into her son's room and sat beside him. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the floor. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did everything right," she said softly. "None of that was your fault." He nodded slightly, but she could tell he didn't believe it. His eyes were distant, filled with a kind of sadness she hadn't seen before. "I didn't even do anything," he whispered. "I was just walking home." She swallowed hard. "I know, and that's the part that hurts the most." For a while they just sat in silence. The sound of crickets outside the window filled the room. Then she told him what was going to happen next. She explained that she had already spoken to the precinct and filed an official complaint. She promised him that the officers involved wouldn't get away with it. But deep down, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She'd seen too many cases where people like her and her son were treated unfairly. Still, she had to believe that telling the truth loud and clear could make a difference this time. The next morning, she woke up early and drove to the FBI field office. Her co-workers greeted her, unaware of what had happened the night before. She went straight to her supervisor's office, knocked once, and stepped inside. He looked up from his computer. "Morning, Agent Carter. You look like you didn't sleep much." "I didn't," she replied. "I need to report something." He gestured for her to sit, and she told him everything, from the moment her son was stopped to the second she showed her badge. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his face growing more serious with each detail. When she finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "That's unacceptable," he said firmly. We'll make sure it's handled properly. Do you have the names of the officers? I do, she said, sliding a notepad across his desk. I also have footage from bystanders. It's already spreading online, he frowned. Social media? Yes, and it's getting a lot of attention. That afternoon, videos from the scene started appearing on news sites and local TV channels. The clips showed everything. The officers shouting, the boy raising his hands, the sudden silence when his mother revealed her identity. People began sharing it everywhere with captions like FBI agent stops racial profiling and teen targeted for walking home. Within hours, the story had reached thousands of viewers. Some were shocked, others angry. Many said the same thing. This could have ended so differently. The police department released a short statement saying they were reviewing the incident and that proper procedure would be followed. But that didn't stop the calls for accountability. Reporters showed up near the family's house hoping for a comment. The mother avoided the cameras, focusing on protecting her son's peace of mind. Inside, she tried to keep things normal. She made dinner, helped him with homework, and asked about school. But every time she looked at him, she could tell he wasn't the same. He laughed less. He jumped at sudden noises. When she mentioned going out, he often said he'd rather stay home. One evening, while they were watching TV, a local news segment came on. The headline flashed across the screen. Officers under investigation after viral stop. The boy froze. That's us, he murmured. His mother quickly changed the channel. Don't worry about it, she said gently. Let them do their job. We've done ours. But he turned to her with wide eyes. What if nothing happens? What if they just go back to work like it never happened? She looked at him, her heart aching. Then we make sure people don't forget, she said. We keep talking until they have to listen. In the following weeks, she attended several meetings, some at the precinct, others with community leaders. Each time she carried herself with quiet strength. She wasn't angry for herself. She was angry for every parent who feared the same thing might happen to their child. The investigation dragged on. The department reviewed the officers' body cam footage, interviewed witnesses, and analyzed reports. One of the officers was placed on leave. The other issued a public apology, but it sounded more like a statement written by someone else. Still, the story wouldn't fade. People continued sharing it, and even national outlets began mentioning it. Civil rights groups reached out, offering support. The mother appreciated it, but she stayed focused on what mattered most, making sure her son healed. One night, she found him sitting on the porch staring at the streetlight. She sat next to him. He didn't look at her when he said, I keep thinking about what would have happened if you didn't show up. She took a deep breath. I think about that too, she admitted. But I did show up. And you're here. That's what matters. He finally looked at her, his eyes soft but still unsure. It's not fair, he said. No, she agreed quietly. It isn't, but we can turn unfair moments into something powerful. The next day, she received a call from a local journalist asking if she'd be willing to speak publicly. She hesitated at first, she wasn't looking for attention. But then she thought about her son, and about the other kids who might go through the same thing. Maybe this was a chance to do something bigger. When she finally agreed, the interview took place in a calm setting. No flashing lights or harsh cameras, just a small studio with warm lighting. She spoke clearly, explaining what happened without anger, but with deep conviction. She didn't mention her position to boast. She mentioned it to show how little it had mattered when bias took control. The clip went viral again. People praised her strength and grace. They admired how she balanced firmness with compassion. More importantly, her message struck a chord, that no one should need a badge or title to be treated with respect. Meanwhile, her son slowly began opening up. His friends reached out, showing support. Teachers at school were kind, careful not to overwhelm him, but encouraging him to share his thoughts if he ever wanted to. Weeks turned into months. The official findings from the investigation were finally released. The department confirmed that the officers had acted on an unverified report and failed to follow de-escalation procedures. One was suspended without pay, the other was reassigned. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a start. When the mother read the report, she felt a mix of relief and sadness. She knew it wouldn't erase the fear from that day, but it proved that speaking up mattered. That evening, as the sun set, she and her son sat together outside. The sky turned orange, and the air felt lighter than it had in weeks. He looked at her and said quietly, "You really made them listen." She smiled, brushing a hand through his hair. "No," she said. "We made them listen." For the first time since that terrible day, he smiled too. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real, and that was enough for her. As night fell, the neighborhood looked peaceful again. The same street where everything had gone wrong now looked calm, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. The boy stood at the edge of the yard, looking at the road. He knew he couldn't erase what happened, but he also knew he wasn't just a victim of it. He was part of something bigger now, a story that reminded people that courage isn't just about standing up to danger, but about standing up for what's right. Inside the house, his mother watched him through the window. Her heart was full, not with anger anymore, but with quiet pride. What had started as a moment of fear was slowly turning into a message of hope. And she knew this was only the beginning of their journey toward something better. Months passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again, though the memories of that day never completely faded. The boy had gone back to his usual routine: school, basketball, and helping his mother around the house. But there was a quiet strength in him now, something that hadn't been there before. He still carried what happened with him, but he didn't let it define him anymore. His mother noticed the change. She saw how he walked a little taller, how he spoke with more confidence when he talked about things that mattered. There were still days when he got quiet, when his mind drifted back to the flashing lights and shouting voices, but those moments came less often now. Healing took time, and she knew that. One morning, while having breakfast, his mother received a call from a local community center. They were organizing a public event about youth and police relations and wanted her to speak. She hesitated for a moment. Public speaking wasn't new to her, but this was personal. She looked at her son, who was buttering his toast, and said, "They want me to talk about what happened." He looked up. "Are you going to?" "I think I should," she said quietly, "but I don't want to do it alone." He tilted his head, surprised. "You want me to come?" She smiled. "Only if you want to. People should hear how it felt, not just from me, but from you too." He didn't answer right away. He stared down at his plate for a moment, thinking. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." The days leading up to the event were busy. Reporters called again, this time to cover the upcoming discussion. Flyers went up around the community with the words "Building Trust Between Police and Youth" printed in bold letters. The mother wasn't trying to make headlines. She just wanted people to listen, to understand, to learn something from what they went through. When the day arrived, the hall was filled with people, families, students, police officers, and local leaders. There was a quiet buzz in the air. Some were curious, others skeptical, but most were there because they wanted change. The mother stood backstage, her heart steady. Her son stood beside her, a little nervous but ready. He glanced around at the crowd, then at her. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Just tell the truth," she whispered. "That's all we have to do." When it was their turn, they walked to the front together. The room fell silent. The mother spoke first. She began not with anger, but with calm honesty. She told them what happened that day. The call, the stop, the fear, the moment everything changed when she revealed who she was. She didn't raise her voice or try to shame anyone. Instead, she talked about understanding, about how easily fear and bias could take control. Then she turned to her son. "Would you like to share something?" she asked. He nodded, stepping up to the microphone. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was clear. "I used to think things like that only happened in other places," he said quietly. "On the news, not here. But it did happen. And it made me scared. Not just of what could have happened to me, but of how fast people can judge someone without knowing them." He paused for a moment, glancing at the police officers sitting near the back. "But I also learned something," he continued. "I learned that speaking up can change things. Because if we don't talk about it, it keeps happening, and I don't want anyone else to feel that way." The room stayed silent for a long moment after he finished. Then slowly, people began to clap. It wasn't loud or rushed. It was thoughtful, full of respect. Some of the officers stood too, nodding slightly. After the event ended, several people came up to them. Parents, teachers, even police officers, to thank them for speaking. One officer, a young man with kind eyes, approached the boy directly. "I saw that video when it happened," he said softly. "I'm sorry for what you went through. I'm trying to do better in how I treat people. Hearing you talk today, it helped." The boy nodded, unsure what to say at first. "Thank you," he finally replied. "That means a lot." On the drive home, his mother smiled as she watched him stare out the window. The city lights reflected on his face. "You did good today," she said. He smiled faintly. "You too." From that day on, their story became more than just a headline. Schools invited them to talk. Community groups asked them to join workshops. Each time they spoke not about anger or blame, but about awareness, kindness, and responsibility. They wanted people to understand that everyone has the power to make a choice, to judge or to listen, to fear or to care. The mother continued her work at the FBI, but she also began helping organize local programs that brought teenagers and police officers together in open discussions. At first it was awkward. The tension in those rooms was hard to ignore. But as the conversations went on, walls started to come down. People listened. They shared stories. They began to see each other as humans, not as labels or uniforms. Her son attended most of those meetings. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he just listened. But each time he left, he felt lighter. He could see change happening, slowly but surely. One afternoon, months later, they received an invitation to a larger conference in the city. It was focused on community reform and diversity training for law enforcement. The organizers wanted them to share their experience there too. Standing on that big stage under bright lights felt different from the small gatherings they'd done before. But the message was the same. The mother talked about what justice truly meant, not just punishment, but understanding and prevention. Her son talked about forgiveness, about how hard it was, but how freeing it could be. When they finished, the audience gave them a standing ovation. Reporters asked questions afterward, but she didn't let the attention get to her. For her, this was never about fame. It was about progress. That night, back at their hotel, the boy looked out the window at the city skyline and said, "Do you think it's really changing?" His mother thought for a moment before answering. "Change doesn't happen fast," she said. "But every time someone listens, every time someone decides to act differently, that's a start." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll keep going." Weeks later, the police department that had once caused them so much pain reached out again. This time it wasn't to apologize, and it was to ask for help. They wanted her to advise on a new training program for officers about bias and communication. She accepted. The first session took place in the same building where she had once filed her complaint. Walking through those doors again felt strange, but not bitter. She saw some familiar faces, including the young officer who had thanked her son after the community event. She stood before the group and spoke from the heart. "When we wear a badge," she said, "we hold more than authority. We hold trust. And when we lose that trust, we all lose something. But we can build it back, one honest conversation at a time." Afterward, she walked outside into the crisp evening air and found her son waiting by the car. He smiled at her, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "How'd it go?" he asked. She took one of the cups and smiled. "Better than I expected." They stood there for a moment, watching the sunset fade into the horizon. It had been a long road, painful, eye-opening, but full of growth. The boy took a slow sip, then said, "You know what's funny? I used to hate that street. I couldn't even walk past it without feeling angry. But now I think of it differently." His mother raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "It's where everything changed," he said. "But it's also where everything started." She nodded, her eyes soft. "You're right." A few days later, he did something he hadn't done since that day. He walked home the same way, past the same houses, the same sidewalk where everything had happened. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The world felt calm again. This time, when a police car drove by, the officer inside gave a small nod and a wave. The boy hesitated, then lifted his hand and waved back. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it meant something, a quiet sign that maybe, just maybe, people were learning. When he reached home, his mother was waiting at the door. She smiled as he walked up the steps. "Good walk?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, it felt right." She pulled him into a hug, holding him close for a long moment. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. And as the evening air grew cool around them, there was a sense of peace. not because everything was fixed, but because they had turned pain into purpose. Their story wasn't just about fear or injustice anymore. It was about courage, hope, and the quiet power of standing together. They had faced something dark and found a way to bring light from it. And in doing so, they showed that real change begins not with anger or revenge, but with understanding, honesty, and love.